Welcome to everybody that stopped by today. It is top of the hour, and if you don't know where you are, you're in Coffee and Consoles, and happy to have you here in our little session. So thanks for stopping by. What we're going to do today is, if you happened to be around last week, or you saw the digest, the capture from what we did, it was really kind of a tech preview. I wanted to really kind of get people excited about what was coming, which is this long asked for feature of being able to map knobs and faders on the desk. And if you've kind of played with it a little bit, what I want to accomplish in this session is really kind of give you more ideas about how to map. I'm not going to tell you how to map. I have ideas, but I'm going to give you some hints about what, basically how to optimize it for what you're doing. The beautiful thing about it is that you can do whatever you want, right? And you can make it work for you. And that may not be exactly what I'm doing, but I want to give you more tools to kind of to help make that easier. And I want to show you some of the preferences that are a little bit esoteric, but once you understand them, they're really, really important to understanding how to use the maps in a better way. So I want to do that. I want to get into a little bit of peripheral stuff as well. We'll talk about attention presets a little bit. We'll talk about some of the display quick jumps and things as well. As always, please, I think the most efficient way is just throw stuff into the text chat. And I'll have Tony Joy is here. Thank you, Tony, for being here. I'll have Tony just kind of, throw stuff into the discussion as we go. And I think that'll kind of keep it on track. Because we've only got an hour, and I want to give you as much info as possible. So yeah, if you got ideas or you want to double click on something I said, or I'm too caffeinated, I can't help you with that. Throw stuff into the text chat, and we'll dig into it deeper. There should be, if you actually look at the chat right now, there should be a Dropbox link, and I thought it'd be cool if you want to play along at home. There's a bunch of XMLs that are the actual plugin maps that I'm using right now on both S4, S6, and EuControl. So if you want to play around and kind of just see some of the concepts that we're going to go through, those files are there. You grab them and play with them, offline at your leisure, whatever. But yes, please, if you've got questions, throw them into the chat, and we're going to kick it off. So thanks for stopping by. I'm Jeff, if you don't know. There's a whole bunch of stuff in this new release of EUCON. We're going to go through some of it. We're not going to go through every little detail, but I want to definitely flag the biggest things. Really, again, the goal of today is to get in deeper on custom maps, because this is really one of these huge features that we've been waiting for a long time. So that's all I'll say. We're going to look at some of these preferences that are really important, like the option to favor insert parameters versus EQ DYN, and I'll show you why that's useful, and applications like with a dynamic EQ or a multiband where that's really useful. That's the way you want to use it. Okay, so let's talk about, I thought this would be useful because I'm not going to assume that you have a particular approach to how to use all this stuff, because there's a lot of different modules, and there's knobs and there's faders and there's multiple pages. There's lots of different ways to do this. So I thought it would be useful to just kind of give you some ideas, what I think are best practices, and then we'll actually go into it and do some practical. So the first rule, if there are any rules, I would say, is to create a map that is intuitive and logical to you. And what I mean by that is, to me, I approach it like, grabbing a piece of outboard gear. I go and grab the input on a distressor, and that is always that knob, right? So my brain says this big knob on the left here first is input. So you create a construct that is intuitive to you. So that would be my first point. It seems obvious, but maybe not. The other thing I think that, after kind of working with this a fair amount, that I think is maybe not also intuitive, but is useful, is to think about the master module, the knob module, whether a local knob module or the dedicated option attention modules on your desk, and the faders as complementary versus comprehensive, meaning, you may not want to dig really deep into the master module. It depends on your use case, your workflow. But it's always useful to have, reverb time or pre-delay, like those really important parameters that are, it's just right there. So even if you're balancing, channels, levels, faders, it's still handy to grab very critical parameters quickly, right, in multiple places. So that's what I would say. You're going to find the particular section of the desk that's most useful for that tool Again, whether it's a noise reduction or multiband or an EQ or whatever, and that's up to you. But I think about the sections as being complementary to each other is, I think, a good idea. We'll get into this in the practical a little bit, but there's some great little stuff kind of sprinkled in here that's not super obvious. But like, for example, the expand faders now have a dedicated bypass. So if you're trying a particular processor and you just want to A/B, with or without it, it's very nice to have that integrated into there. Okay, that's a small one. A couple more, and then we'll get into actually looking at doing the maps. This is another super obvious one, but certainly for the expand 32s, the stuff that you use all the time or that's most critical, put it closest to you, right? Bottom left is, in my opinion, kind of Western, is the, it's the most easy to get to. So think about putting your key parameters down kind of bottom left. This is another technique that I think is useful, whether on the 32 expand knobs or the center section or the faders. Things that are very important, like in my estimation, mix percentage, on a reverb, or mix percentage or blend or parallel or whatever on a compressor. You can put those on multiple pages so that regardless of what section of stuff you're looking at, it's always there, right? I think of it like a global. And I'll show you how to do that and kind of how to look at that. But I think it's useful to duplicate parameters among multiple pages. You can also now, don't worry about jamming everything into a small space, because every section has unlimited pages, whether it's the master, the expand knobs, or the expand faders. You can have as many pages as you want, and therefore, a page can be allocated to a specific band of a multiband. A page can be allocated to a specific channel of a immersive panner. A page can be allocated, you get the idea. So just think about pages and just use as many as you need. And it's a better way to group stuff and leave space to make it easier. It's all about having an intuitive, logical interface, right? And then the last one, which I made reference to last week, but we'll actually look at, is the peer parameters. What that means is sometimes the third parties kind of nest things underneath a toggled switch, right? So tear those off, and I'll show you how to do that, and put them on their own, fader. There might be certain third-party compressors where the blend or the mix percentage is actually, the parallel is actually not on the top level, and you can pull that off and put it on its own fader, or knob, which I think is great. So find the things that are critical, put them on their own dedicated control. Okay. I'm going to start with preferences. I know preferences are really kind of terrifying for some people, but they're really important. So I'm going to start with preferences, and this one's a big one. This is really important, and we're going to actually look at some workflow. So the preference is called, and there's no brevity here whatsoever, show EQ and DYN plugins as inserts if there's an insert custom map. Okay, so what does this mean in English? It basically means if you or me created a map for, let's in this case, Arousor. If I created an actual insert parameter map, and that box is ticked, when I click from the DAW, from Pro Tools, instead of populating my knob module with green because, oh, I know you're a compressor, show me that custom cool map that you created instead. That's what that says, right? So it goes from looking like that to looking like that, right? In an Arousor, in this case, it's a good example because there's saturation, there's filters, there's blends, there's all kinds of stuff that's not just a normal threshold ratio attack release compressor, right? And so the multiband and the dynamic EQs, you'll see really, really fall into this category. And we're gonna show this workflow. Okay. So let's start with that. Let's go to Pro Tools. You should be able to see Pro Tools. You're gonna see my master module on the right side of the screen. I've just got some various tracks of different widths, mono stereo, 5171, that we're gonna look at. Okay. And this is, if you've not been here before, this is an S4, 16 faders, options, center section, display modules. And that's kind of what we have here. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is look at that preference. So a couple things we want to start with here. We're going to look at this track. It's called Cessna, and it's a multi-channel ambience. And it's an insert view right now. It's focused Focus is a term specifically to S4 to choose the function, right? To choose whether I'm looking at, EQ or DYN or inserts, or what am I looking at on that strip, right? That's what that does. So let's go to settings. And I want to show you a couple things that are very important that we're going to, just so you know as we start working what's going on here. Two things. Insert selection is turned on for auto expand functions. What does that mean? Well, it means if I go and push into, let's say the SoundField plugin, it's going to automatically expand the knobs, and that's what it did. Okay, so that's what you're looking at. It automatically expanded the knobs because I pushed into the plugin. So I'm going to hit back, get out of that. The other thing I have turned off is auto expand faders, and I have that by design turned off because I want to have control of when my faders switch or don't switch. So one more time, push into Altiverb. I've got control, right here on my, and this is actually custom, and we'll get into that. If I hold down expand one more time, I'm now actually swapping out the actual channel faders for controls over my reverb time and pre-delay and wet dry and all that stuff. Okay, so it's an extra step, but it can give you extra levels of control. I'm going to hit back on the inserts, and it takes me back into chain view, top level view, right? So those are the first two things that are important. Now, let's get to the preference that I just set up, which is show EQ. And I made a button for it. I would never normally do this, but it's just I'm gonna switch back and forth, and that's why I'm toggling this with the switch on the transport. But it's show EQ and DYN as insert. So let's explain this, let's go into this. So what we're gonna do, let's just, we'll start with something simple like Arousor. And we're gonna have that turned off. And from Pro Tools, you should be able to see me. Actually, let's click on equality first. I'm going to go to DMG equality. I'm going to click on it. And so what just happened, basically, and actually let's flip over to so you can actually see the center section. And we're going to go and you should be able to see this section right here lighting up. And that is targeted as the on attention zone. And so check it out. If I click on equality, this is now lit up with a dedicated EQ. As you can see, you guys are all familiar with what this looks like. However, mine has probably been modified, but we'll get into that as well. So dedicated EQ, right? I'm going to toggle the preference, and now I'm going to click back on equality one more time. Now it says, oh, I see you've got a custom map. I'm going to use that because it exists and you got the preference turned on. And so, it might be in this case similar, but depends on what you want to control. And we'll get into some details of how you would use this. So let's click on something else. I'm going to turn the preference off, and I'm going to click on Arousor. And it goes into green mode, which is very sparse, right? And you can see this is actually modified as well. That might be slightly confusing. So let's default this map back because I don't want to take it off the rails too fast. So let's actually go back to the strip here, okay? And we're going to go and find Arousor in our inserts. So I'm gonna basically push to select Arousor, and that is the insert parameter map. We actually want the dedicated DYN map, which right now has got very little in there. I'm going to hit custom. And for this example, I'm going to hit factory all. I'm going to say, take me back to the default of all of the settings for what the dynamics look like. Okay. So that's going to be factory all right here. Do you really want to do this? I'm going to say, yeah, I do. Okay. So now you should see a difference when we go and click on the Arousor. I'm going to go back to equality one more time. I'll go back to Arousor. Okay, so check it out. Now it's back to that default threshold ratio attack release, as you can see, because that is the default layout for the dedicated dynamics. Now, check it out. If I go turn the preference back on, right? And I'm just going to stay on the home page because there's more information there, but the preference is back on, and I'm going to click on Arousor. And check it out. It's now favoring my custom insert parameters map, which is far, far more useful. Check this out. If I want to get to, saturation and stuff, second harmonics, I want to toggle the saturation section off. I've got essentially input ratio attack release right here. I can toggle into opto modes. I can get into the attack modifications. I can get into, sidechain stuff. So very, very useful as compared to with the preference off. clicking on said plugin, very, very sparse, right? Because it's just not, it's more than a compressor, okay? So that is the start of that conversation of that tool, which is very, very useful. One other thing I want to mention while we're in this concept, because I think it's very, very useful, are some of the attention presets. And we'll come back to that in a second. But all I want to do is I'm going to hit attention on this track. And you're going to see the default behavior is EQ in knob 1, DYN in knob 2. And that's how this is set up right now. If you go to your extras page with the current version of software, go to attention presets. The concept of this is, and we'll get into it in some more detail, is basically like a macro where I can quickly toggle what I get on my knobs and faders and center section. That's what this is all about. So whether or not you have one or two zones doesn't matter. But if I quickly want to say, you know what, for a while, I'm just going to work on compression and I want to focus on that. What I can do is I can use the second column. These are all duplicated. Everything on the left column is duplicated to the right column. You can modify all of this. But the point is, when I hit attention, now it's totally flipped, right? It's basically, okay, DYN is always down here, EQ is down here. So anytime I attention, right, it's going to stay in that way. And then I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go back, I'm going to EQ for a while. So I'm going to go back to the first column. And so that's what that's doing. It's not just changing these two things. It's changing expand faders. It's changing the center section. It's changing what happens when you click. Where does that go? Okay. So we'll get into that in a little more detail, but I just wanted to kind of set it up. So let's get into some mapping and some of the big, big concepts of, let me just jump back to the prezo for a second. The big concepts are mapping the master module, mapping the knob module. As you just saw, we did some changes with the dedicated dynamics, and then expand faders and the details within expand faders in multiple pages. Okay, so those are the primary sections. There are additional things you can map. If you're on S6, you can actually do stuff with the process module, but we're not going to get into that today. I'm going to do the big sections. Okay, so let's jump back into Pro Tools and let's start doing a little bit of work with some mapping. Okay, so we're gonna go back to our Cessna track, a multi-channel track. It's attentioned, it's focused. We're looking at inserts, as you can see. Excuse me. Let's start with some basic stuff. Maybe we'll just jump into Altiverb. Okay, I'm going to do this kind of out of sequence, but the first thing to understand is you need to attention the track that you want to work on. It needs to show up on the center section. You can see I'm on track 45 Cessna. Yeah, that's the one I want to work on. The second thing is you need to touch on the function scroller. So let's just say where it looks like this. You actually need to jump into expand out the view. So right now you're looking at top level inserts. I need to choose the plugin I want to work on. And to do that, you actually push the encoder adjacent to Altiverb. Say, oh, you know what? I'm going to work on Altiverb. And that's now splayed out all the inserts on the track. Okay. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to press custom down here. And it's now saying, do you want to map the center section? Do you want to map an expand knob? Do you want to map an expand fader? We're going to let's just start with the 32 because it's a very powerful section, right? And we're going to draw, it's right here, and that is ready to go. And if there's something there already, let's just say, you know what? I had some ideas. I don't know that my ideas are great. So let's start over, if you will. All you got to do is hold down Shift. And under this page action section, it just says, just kill all the pages. That's one thing you can do. See that toggles in and just do Shift clear all. And that just blows all the pages away, essentially. Okay. So as always, start the conversation with the most important stuff, lowest level, right? So let's go grab reverb time, obviously very important. And you can certainly interact with things as you start placing them. My kind of interpretation is to place wet dry, always place wet dry on the right. That's just, you can do whatever you want, but this makes sense to me is putting kind of wet dry over here. Let's get into some peer parameters because these are great. And this is this concept of actually taking off and placing a parameter exactly where you want it. Let me show you an example of that. Let's say I really want, direct color. It's kind of an esoteric parameter, but I want to get access to that. I can touch direct gain, or I have to know where it's located at first, but I happen to know that it's actually nested under direct gain. So what I can do is I can go and say, you know what, instead of doing this switched thing on the direct gain, just give me, I only care about this thing, direct color, and I want that right here, okay? So now that's actually been taken off onto its own dedicated knob, and that's what I wanted to accomplish. Another maybe better example of that same process would be the EQ parameters, right? So gain, frequency, and Q for low and high frequency, those are very, very useful. So let's say we want to actually put that on a column or 2 columns. Let's just allocate a couple columns because, again, we've got multiple pages. So let's just do this. So I'm going to touch EQ low gain. I'm going to touch here. So that's now placed, and you can see you can interact as you go. Absolutely. This is usually the switch functions, as you're used to, like with EQ, are always going to be adjacent to the gain in general. So you can see I'm killing the whole EQ section, right? Let's add frequency. So go to EQ low gain, EQ low frequency, touch that. It says, again, do you want me to stay as a switched parameter that the manufacturer defined? I'm going to say, no, I don't. I really just want frequency. So touch frequency, and oh, I just did that wrong. So that actually gives me a good opportunity to do a clear. So let's just go to knob mode. Clear is a latching function. You can just remove anything if you mess up like I just did. So let's just do it again. EQ low freq. I want just frequency, and I want it here. Do the same thing for Q. Put it here. Okay, so what did we just do? Well, we've got now gain, frequency, Q, really handy, and enabling all of our EQ section for low frequency. That's great. I can quickly do exactly the same thing for high. So let's just do this. If you know there's a peer parameter, just to save time, you can double press, and that will give you the switched function, right? Which, let's just throw it up here for a second. I don't want the switch function, but I just wanted to show you that. I'm going to go frequency, and I'm going to go Q. Okay, and we'll just do a clear and blow that away. Okay, so peer parameters, that's really useful to know how to pull those off as they're dedicated, dedicated controls for EQs. Very important because they can be nested and hidden otherwise. Let's do some paging. Let's add some paging because that's also important. And just basically under the page actions, just hit add. And so you're going to get another page or pages. You can have as many as you want. And again, depending on the complexity of the plugin, you can do whatever you want. Let's just say for quick access on page 2, maybe I want controls for all of the multi-channel trims or levels of the reverb. And that's fine, again. So basically, let's just go and touch front, rear, center, LFE. Okay, this is just showing how to take advantage of pages. And you can see there's front, there's rear, there's center, there's LFE. If we hit play for a second, we should be able to, you could see our contributing to the center bleed or contributing to the LFE bleed, right? Attenuating the rears. You should be able to see that in the meters in the plugin. So we're on page 2, obviously, right? Go back to page 1. And I can remove pages. I can add pages. This page, I think I might have added additional pages. Let's just delete this. So I'm not even sure that I wanted to do that. Okay, so now I have 2 pages. And okay, so obviously if I click on this plugin from the DAW and I've set this knob to show this stuff, it's gonna do just that, right? So let's add one more column and then we'll hit OK. So let's do low damp and put that here, mid, and again, you can double touch if you want peer parameters. So basically saying, just get past the dialog screen quickly, right? And now I've got low, mid, and high, and then the cycled function is the crossovers. When you're done with your map, you want to hit done, okay? And just to kind of validate this, just to show the workflow again, this first knob on my console is set to the on attention. When I click on something, show up here, right? So what I just did should show up there, as you can see in a second. If I click on Altiverb, on attention says, show me the stuff, right? There's reverb time, there's direct color we talked about, there's the EQ, there's our mix percentage, and there should be multiple pages, and there are multiple pages, right? Okay, so that is the concept. If you get to a point where you're like, you want to get back to factory, again, you can, just kind of, let me just get into the granular nature of that a little bit. You can do either factory or factory all. So let me explain that. So let's go back. Let's just go local for a second. If I repress attention It's going to go back to the default EQ DYN. I'm top level. I'm going to push into Altiverb. I'm not in expand faders, but I can certainly jump into expand faders, right? Because I've created a map previously for that as well. I want to blow away and factory default just the knobs, but I want to keep the faders. How do I do that? Well, basically what you can do is make sure Altiverb is targeted. The track is attentioned, Altiverb is targeted, and you hit custom, okay? What it's asking you for is which map are you working on? Well, I'm working on the 32. Cool. Now that you've told it which map you're working on, you can do a factory, right? Factory all says blow away all maps for Altiverb, which I do not want to do. I just want to blow away the 32. So I'm going to hit factory. It says, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. Hit OK. Now let's jump back into the 32, and you're going to see that that is now the factory map for Altiverb, right? You can see all that stuff mapped. Size, wet dry is actually over here. And likewise, if I click on Altiverb, it's going to show up here. It's back in a factory map, right? Okay, does that make sense? So that is the first, that's kind of the start, if you will, of some mapping concepts. So how we're doing good. Let's take a look at a little bit of faders and some concepts within that. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to go, let's actually push into I've got a SoundField plugin brought up, which now is owned by Rode. And we have the ability to play with the individual channels and do rotates and things like that. So let's talk a little bit about creating multiple maps and leaving space and using paging and all of that good stuff. So what we're going to do is let's actually access the expand faders I've already created. We'll do some modifications on this. To do that, we want to go just like we did before. We want to make sure we touch the appropriate plugin. In this case, it's SoundField, and then touch custom, and then touch the section, which is illuminated in purple, to say, I want to work on faders. And it's going to bring up whatever you started with. If you have a starting setting, if you didn't, it would be blank, right? Pretty straightforward. The first thing to understand is that if you want to overwrite, you can do that, right? Let's just say I want to have quick control over, I don't know, maybe the trim and the microphone type, for example, right? So let's just touch input trim first, and then second, we're going to touch microphone. And for this, I can actually stack up a bunch of selections and then touch a fader, and it's going to build that left to right. Right, so there's the trim. You can see the trim right there, and there is the, was it up? Was your Ambisonics mic up facing? Was it, was it side? Was it inverted? And so, just a quick way to kind of, get to that. I'm going to go back to the concept of doing a quick clear, which is really handy. Hold down the shift on the master module and go to page X and say clear all. Right, that just blows away quickly everything that you have in there. And then again, if I want to do, let's say rotation, elevation, let's do input trim, microphone, drop those down, and then let's just do, maybe some of the actual channel controls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll touch there. Okay, just quickly throwing some parameters down onto the faders, right? So I've got rotation, I've got some specific trims, microphone types, etc. And if you want to overwrite anything at any time, all you've got to do is basically touch, and you can then overwrite whatever you've done, right? So I can just burn off, just write over any parameter very quickly, depending on what you want to map. So let's grab a couple more things here and drop those down here. Right. So now I'm actually controlling the individual legs and the rotation. Okay. So what I wanted to mention, and if you've gone through this process and you have not hit done, you can always hit cancel. Right. I can say, you know what? I don't like anything I just did. So, and sometimes that happens. What you can do is let's go back into the thing I already created. I'm going to hold on expand to get in here. And I just want to show you, you can use multiple pages to separate important parameters, right? So again, on the top level, I've got the control over those legs and the rotation. I've got elevation and the tilts. And if I go to page 2, we've got, it's actually obscured right now. You can't see it. It's down below the trims. And then I've got the outputs right here, right? And parameters appropriate to that page are on that page, but you can certainly use space to logically separate parameters. I think it's very useful. Another thing that's great, really useful, is use the option key locally to null parameters, right? You need to null a trim, right? An output. You can do that just with option, right? Which is very, very handy. You have a local bypass that we made reference to, right? Depending on whatever plugin you're working on right now, you can always bypass that, and it's on every page, right? So take advantage of that. If you need to add another page, you jump back in, add a page, drop some parameters down there, you're good to go. Okay. So a little bit of, yeah, sure.
Hey, sorry to interrupt you, but we have one question regarding the custom fader map.
Okay.
So I'll read the question out to you. Does the custom map have to take the entire fader bucket, or can it be like a layout with just 1 or 2 parameters and channels are banked around it? Like if you only had reverb time and pre-delay and the 6 faders are just blank, which tracks can use, I'm assuming?
Yeah, no, so there's no, it will not interleave with channels. Yeah, so if you had a lot smaller console and you're trying to take advantage of and again, I know exactly what you're asking. That's one of the reasons I don't use auto expand faders. If you've got an 8 or a 16 fader or a smaller console, you only want to get to the expand faders when you want to get to them. But no, you cannot although you can put as any parameters anywhere and have space and have duplicated things, you cannot interleave or just only show parameters on, let's say, faders 7 and 8. It will take it up. But honestly, I mean, it's a millisecond, it's half a second or less to get in and out. You can balance your levels, and then you can certainly get back into what you were doing. So I think once you find a workflow, it's absolutely viable, right? So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. So just to kind of take another kind of quick look at some things here, let's go back into, we're jumping out of, we jumped out of the SoundField. Let's jump into Altiverb and hold down expand for a second. So we're now into the Altiverb map, which I created previously. Any switch functions you can see are active right there. But the concept of having, of the parallel parameters, I think is useful. So on page 1, obviously things like reverb time and brightness are very important. And then your wet dry is here. Page 2, you still have wet dry. So if there's some really important parameters, I would anchor them on multiple pages. I think that's very useful. To regardless of where you are, you may want to blend wet dry, or you may want to blend parallel, or you may want, whatever the parameter is. So that's that concept of having anchored parameters. And all you do is just add that to multiple locations. Okay. So that is the concept with that. Okay, let's get to, I want to dig into a couple other ideas. So let's hit expand. Let's jump back out of this. Let's take a look at Pro Q3. And I'm going to back out of the top level inserts here. And we're going to jump into, I'm going to hit page, and we're going to jump into Pro Q3. Okay, so this is now a insert parameter view. It's not dedicated EQ. Right, which we're gonna look at in more detail in a second. But it's a map that I created, and it's basically a variation of insert parameters for this particular plugin. And it's really kind of using this flat 7 model, right? It's really using a 7-band model, which is kind of just for compatibility reasons, I would say. And band 1 is currently a low cut. It doesn't have to be, but it is currently. Likewise, band 7 is a high cut. Okay, so that's just what that is. And then it's a vertical orientation. So if I go to band 2 is currently in Bell. How do I know it's in Bell? Well, that's because the top encoder is the shape. Right. So if I wanted band 2 to be a shelf, now it's a shelf. Right. And so I've got gain, frequency, Q, and then I can also, pop in and change the slope. Right. If I want to get back to a bell, just change that. And I just put the parameters there, and you can certainly do the same thing. Enable the band, disable the band. Okay. So just iterate. Band 2, band 3, band 4, they're all vertical. Gain, frequency, Q, shape. And then you would consider the peer parameter, slope as a peer parameter, right? So if I go back to that, what is now being used as high pass filter, you can press into Q, for example, and then you're toggling from brick wall to 6 dB per octave for your high pass. Okay, so that's what that's doing right now. So why am I describing all of this? Well, because I want to show you some possible techniques to setting these up in a way that makes sense for you. Again, you don't have to do exactly what I'm doing, but on the far column, I've got some globals. If you wanted to actually change the speed of the RTA, you could, right, from fast or slow, medium. When you want to change the detail, the response time, the scale, any of this, you can change it. So I'm considering this last column a global, right? That's kind of the first idea, okay? On the second page, I've thought about, hey, what if I want to do dynamic EQ and I want to have quick access to it? Well, you can just add another page. And so on page 2, what I've done is I've thought about this as a dynamic EQ, band 1, really the first band, second band, third band, fourth band. And so if I want to control, we were talking about, controlling band 2, right? So there's gain frequency Q, you've got some duplicated parameters, but then I've also can just toggle into, the range and the threshold, and all the dynamic EQ parameters for that are kind of now splayed out. So that's one possible way to, to start thinking about the use of pages, right? How are you actually using the pages? If you look at the factory assignment of some of this stuff, it is interleaved, right? It goes, it's normal EQ stuff and then dynamic stuff, normal EQ. And that may not be the most logical thing for your brain, but you can do whatever you want. Page 1 to me is very intuitive because it's basically just EQ mode, right? Page 2, I jump in and, hey, now I can actually get into, range and threshold and look at sidechain and do any of that stuff that I want to, right? So that's one possible way to approach this with this some of these maps. Now, with that concept all discussed, let's jump back to the concept of EQ versus insert parameters, right? If you remember, I'm going to go and click on FabFilter, and of course it's kind of in the way. Let me shrink the sends for a second so I can see this better. And I actually need to look at 2 rows of inserts really quickly. Okay, so I'm actually going to go and click on Pro Q3 from the DAW, right? From Pro Tools, I'm clicking on it. And so right now you can see that preference is turned off because it's brought up my, kind of that default, mapping, right? The dedicated EQ mapping, if you will. If I toggle that preference back on and I go and click back on Pro Q3, what's going to happen? Well, it's going to bring up my optimized map, which is the way I want it to be set up, right? Again, do whatever you want, but this is the way I want it set up. And on page 2, I've got control over the dynamics parameters, right? For that dynamic EQ. And that's just the way I set it up. But that is a really important discussion of the behavior of dedicated EQ and DYN tools, because they're identified by Pro Tools, by EUCON as, hey, I'm an EQ. I'm going to give you dedicated EQ. That may not be what you want, right? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but you can toggle that, and that's an important thing to understand, right? And then you can also, change the orientation of how things show up. DYN EQ, we'll get into a little more depth on this, but maybe you want insert chain sends, or the opposite of that, which is sends insert chain, or maybe you want insert chain EQ, or the opposite of that. And these are just things I came up with. You can do whatever you want, but the point is those quick attention presets are changing all of the fader zones, the knob zones, the fader zones, and what happens on the center section as well, right, on attention. Okay, so how are we doing here? We are quickly approaching so this is really important. how to manage the data for maps, right? This is very, very important. So let's discuss this a little bit. And while we're in here, I'm going to jump over and show you. I've got another workstation. There's some really cool stuff with maps, and I'm going to show you a couple examples in just a second. So the first thing is, as always, make sure Pro Tools in the workstations page, and I'll jump back there in a second. Let's go back there in a second. Make sure that in the workstations page, you've declared Pro Tools with the blue star as, hey, I am the application that's carrying all the XML data, right? All the auto load data. That's really important. And then also make sure that you tick the box that says, under the globals, it says, hey, save the custom maps with the session. That's really what that's saying. Make sure you tick that box, okay? If you do that, then any new stuff you create will be in that session. And of course, you're going to ask, well, I want to use that in other sessions. Well, certainly you can do that too. I can save it as a template. That can be my new starting place. I can also untick that, clear maps thing, and then just load a legacy session where I've never mapped before, or I know I didn't have all this new cool mapping, and then it'll basically merge into that, and I can resave that, and now that those maps will be associated with that session, right? That's a way. Those maps also exist on your drive as XMLs, and I want to show you that. And there's the paths, which is probably hard to kind of digest quickly. But let me just jump back out. Let's go to Pro Tools for a second. I want to show you all the fun stuff of where these are and how they work. So first of all, again, make sure you have the auto load custom map stuff on. That's really important. Make sure you have the blue star. It says, hey, Pro Tools is carrying all the data. That's where it's coming from, right? That's important. On the S4, S6, I know this might be a little esoteric, but there is a specific path, and it's here. It's basically your S6 user, app data, ultimately under consoles, knob maps. And you can see anything that and that's in the same files I put in the Dropbox. These are XMLs, right? And you can look at, kind of look at how those show up and where those are at. But what I want to do now is I want to show you the viability of controlling something from the center section. So let's just go back to the center section, and then I'm going to jump over to something else real quick. So let's do this. I'm going to jump out of here. We're going to make sure the Cessna track is attention. We're focused. Let's go look at the SoundField real quick. Okay, so there's the SoundField plugin. And I'm going to grab the knob, and I should have rotation. We showed it in a different way previously, and then the different legs, and then this should be elevation, and then the different tilts, right? Okay, we've already kind of talked about that. Altiverb, we'll show that real quick. Reverb time, we talked about, and then the different dampenings we talked about. So that's on my center section. Why am I showing all this? Because I want to show you the compatibility of the map. There's a 4x2 on my S4, S6. There's a 4x2 on my Avid Control dock, right? So all that stuff, you don't have to redo the work, which is really great. So with that said, let's go jump over to my other machine. Now my other machine is another Pro Tools rig, which has got the same, I just copy those files over that I just showed you. And I've got the same control, right? So you can see there's my rotation, and those same kind of 4x2s work, right? There is, and I'm just grabbing it because it's on a screen share. I'm just grabbing it from the plugin because I'm not in that room right now, but you get the idea. And elevation and the tilts, right? And let's go to Altiverb. Go click on Altiverb, and we should have exactly the same control that we just described. Reverb time bottom right, and then the dampening that we described is built up from there, low, mid, freak. And even the pair parameters and the crossovers and all that stuff works, right? So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is really a beautiful thing. If I go and click on Arousor, what did that just do? Well, it's the exact same concept that we described previously. What do I mean by that? If I go into EuControl settings, I want to show EQ DYN as, if there's a custom map, it's exactly the same thing we did on S4, S6. So basically go and click on that thing again, click on Arousor one more time. And hey, what is it doing now? It's giving you the thing I care about, my custom map, which is kind of like threshold ratio attack release on the right. Attack release on the right. And then, mix, saturation, all that good stuff. However I want to set it up, right? But you're seeing the exact conversation about, Are you going to show me dedicated EQ or DYN, or are you going to show me a custom map? And all these custom maps came from, I built them all in S4, right? So that is a really cool thing, especially if you've got multiple rooms or you work on a laptop sometimes, and you know, all of those conversations. It's really great. So let's go back to SoundField. One other thing I want to mention that's I forgot to mention, but is really great and important. And if you've been around Avid Digi for a while, we had some map constructs previously, but they were a lot clumsier. And one of the things that was really problematic was, again, for something like SoundField or Altiverb, is it mono? Is it stereo? Is it 5.1? Is it 7.1? Is it 7.1.2? Back in the old days, those would all be separate maps, which is a complete disaster. So now you can actually see that the Cessna is actually a 5.1 Altiverb, and it doesn't care. It's the same exact map. Actually, I'm sorry. It doesn't matter if it's Altiverb or SoundField. Same conversation. The Cessna track has got a SoundField on it. It's a 5.1 flavor, right? But it's using and you can see I've got kind of 5.1 controls, right? It's using exactly the same map that I built on S4, regardless of the width. So this is really great. So I go to the 7.1 flavor and check it out. There's your rotation. Now check it out. I've got 7.1 controls because I built them in there, and it's all in the same map. So it means if your reverb does, you know, from mono up to, you know, Atmos, you don't have to rebuild it, you know, multiple times or have multiple versions, which is really a great thing. So that is another really cool side effect of the maps. I think I might have, oh yeah, here's the map where these are stored. It's a little bit esoteric. They exist. Again, they've been copied over. You know, it is under the user preferences. It's under Avid Consoles Knob Maps. It's all described in the documentation. You can find that. But again, once you throw the files in there you've built, it's very very straightforward, right? And that was just one flavor of the maps. That was I showed you the 4x2 taking advantage of Avid Control plus the dock, right? Okay, let's flip back over to Pro Tools. And let's go into here. Okay, how are we doing? I'm gonna keep going. If any questions come in, we'll take them. But I want to show you a couple last additional ideas in the time we have. What are those ideas? Well, I thought it would be cool to have better control over the displays. Now, yeah, of course, you can get to everything. It's just in a lot of different places. So there's now a QuickJump, which allows you to tweak every aspect of the channel, the master meter, and the post meter displays in a pretty simple way. So if you do a shift zoom vertical, you can get to it. So I'll show you that real quick because it's very, very handy. So let's see. Let's actually get out of, well, we'll do this. First of all, shift. Any shift on any fader module or channel strip module, hold that down and press the zoom vertical. You're going to see just the master module stuff change. Now let's do a couple simple things. Let's hit play. And this quadrant over here is all about channels. So you've got zoom in, zoom out. You should be able to see, actually it's very hard, based on that view, it's hard to see. So let me change the view. So let's actually go into a split waveform on the bottom kind of view. You should be able to see that now. And basically let's speed up the waveform so you can see that. You should be able to see that at the top of the screen on the actual console, right? So I'm changing the view presets. So let's go into, one function, two functions, waveforms versus, meters, whatever you want, you can get to pretty much instantaneously, and you can change the views instantaneously. And let's say on the master meters, I just want to say, hey, let's actually have bigger meters. I can go and on the right side here, you should be able to see my master meters now go expose. Hey, 8 big meters is now what I'm seeing for. In this case, these are for Matrix and Dadman and stuff like that. But it's very, very quick to toggle around and change how all this stuff looks for all the different flavors of meters. Okay, so that's that was the objective. A little bit more about attention presets in a couple minutes here. These are really just macros. And again, think about it like, what is attention knob 1 doing? What is attention knob 2 doing? What are the attention faders doing? What is the master module defaulting to show? Where does the DAW click go? Okay, that's what this is doing. And it's really just taking advantage of the new 21.6, the ability to save every setting and actually call multiple settings and put them on a button. That's really all it's doing. But I think it's a really useful time savings feature to be able to click a single button and change all of your real estate to be able to work the way you want to work. If maybe you're doing Atmos and you want, Atmos parameters here, and then, bus, which would be object bus switching, things like that, you can quickly jump into that mode, which would normally take a lot of time to kind of get into that view. You can do it in one quick second, right? That's the concept. And I really, these are really designed to customize. It's a start. So please go and play with it and make it work for you. I think that's really the idea with that. Okay. This is not so sexy, but it's also very useful. Basically now what you can do is you can pop a jump drive in the back of your S4 S6, and you can do an export system surface configuration. And the cool thing about that is, if you have any issues, or if you've got to swap something out, or you just want to, send information to somebody, whether it's Avid or reseller or whatever, the system ID's in there, all the individual module serial numbers are in there. It just dumps out all the information for all the configurations in an XML and throws it on the stick. And you can then, send that, give that to somebody, email that to somebody. It's super handy. So it's more of a diagnostic kind of thing, but it's very, 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 very useful to have that capability. Okay. Okay. A couple last things. Let's go back, jump into Pro Tools, and we're going to show you a couple last things here. Okay, so we are back. I'm going to go home on the soft keys. So just do Shift 0. Okay, and we're going to take a look at a couple maps and kind of just moving around and a little bit of what I just described previously. So let's go and bring up the attention presets. I'm going to attention the Cessna. This is just it's a 5.1 track. It's not Atmos. But if I did want to get into that view that I described, we can just press in, and I should have access to, let's see if I set this up in a way. So this is top level inserts and then sends. And we also have access to top level inserts and EQ. And then this would be EQ and object bus switching. And then that would be EQ and DYN and that kind of conversation. So that's what that's looking at. Let's actually go and just interrogate a couple last maps and just show you some other ideas here. I'm going to go back. Let's actually go to the BB1 track, and we're going to go into Arousor. I'm going to pop into that. And if I go and grab, we're back into the map that I set up that you actually saw a version of this. Let's actually bring it up on the center section as well. So I can push into Arousor, so you'll see it here as well. And on the EuControl system, you saw input, ratio, attack, release here. And I have input, ratio, attack, release here. Let's just do a little bit of modification of this and then kind of resave what we have. So to do that, we're back in Arousor. We hit custom. We touch the knob that we want to edit. I can either remove one parameter by just either doing a knob clear, or easier, do a shift and clear everything quickly, and then essentially remap what I want to map, right? In whatever way I want to map it. So input, ratio, attack, release, as you can see. Okay, got that. You can interact with everything as you're working. Let's say we want to show all of the sidechain stuff, and we'll just do let's just do our boost cut, frequency, and our bandwidth here, right? Let's expose the saturation stuff and just show that real quick. There's saturation, there's second harmonics. As always, the switched functions that are adjacent to the primary encoder for each section are always going to defeat that section. So for example, if we look at, there's the sidechain EQ, there's the soft clipping, the saturation section. They're kind of always adjacent to that area. Okay, when you're done with what you've got, you hit done. Your map is ready to go. Again, take advantage of the preference that we looked at, which is called Show EQ and DYN plugins as inserts if there's a custom map. And in doing so, when I click on this, depending on where you've set the on attention stuff to go, it's now going to bring back that exact, custom, more complex in some cases, map that you define and throw it into the zone that you created, right? So we're now back to controlling SAT, to controlling our boost cut. With that off, it's going to always default to the dedicated EQ or DYN. Now, in the 2 minutes we have left, let's go back to the home page here for a second, and let's go to DMG equality. Just want to show you this really quick. So let's bring this onto the center section. What are we seeing here? Well, we're seeing high band gain, frequency, Q, and slope. And that's not normal. That's not the normal dedicated EQ for the center section, because I modified that. You can also modify the center the dedicated EQ. So, for example, let's go with custom EQ. I'm just going to hit factory all, which is going to change everything about the dedicated EQ, right? I'm going to hit OK. Now, check it out. It's back to that kind of euphonic style. This is high mid gain, high mid freak. To get into Q, I've got to press cell, right? And that's the default. You may or may not like that. That's completely up to you. But the point of this is that not only can you tweak the insert parameters, which I think of as a more complex kind of exactly what I want for a more advanced plugin, but you can also customize the dedicateds. So if you always want to get to your high pass, low pass filters on the first page, it's always there. You can put it there. And I think that's really handy. All you've got to do is go into custom, say I want to modify the center section, and we're going to basically modify what the dedicated EQ model is for our center section. And we want to basically put some, we want to put some filters on there. So basically all I've got to do is figure out what I want. Let's say high pass frequency here. And there's going to be a toggle in this case, low pass frequency here and that. And then maybe I want gain frequency Q, for example, for maybe I still want the high mid band, but I actually want specific parameters like we talked about, peer parameters, right? So I'm just going to do that much for right now, just so you can see the concept. So that now on attention, when I go to the dedicated EQ model, which will apply to anything, DMG, EQ37, FabFilter, waves, whatever, I always have access to my filters, right? That's just one possible way to think about this. And I've got a dedicated Q, which some people really like. So hopefully you got an idea of just the level of tweaking and customization, and just think of it as really optimizing this for the way that you work, right? This is not the way I work. I'm just trying to expose you to what you can do to make this easier to use. And not just on the center section, but the expand zones for knobs, the expand zones for faders, and think about them in a complementary manner where, maybe I don't want every possible parameter on the center dock knobs, but there's certain more complex things I want to dig into that are going to come up on the expand knobs or expand faders. And you can think about it in those terms. So any last questions you want to cover?
We don't have any questions, but if anyone wants to speak or type up the questions, feel free. And Jeff, as always, great presentation. Really loved it. So thank you for all the hard work and what you do.
Awesome. And thanks, Jeff. Just drop in to say thank you. It's always really, how to say it in English? I don't know how to say it. I learn a lot. Always give me some nice tips. Thank you very much.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. If there's no last questions, we'll wrap, and check out those custom map files and dig into it. And certainly, if you have questions about anything, let us know, and we'll see you next time.